for the 2021-22 season. Our presenter today is David Super, and we'll look at the title here. It's Musical Memories, Second Movement Performance. This is part two. He did the last one actually a year ago.
Just almost 365 days.
And yeah, I know, and that's amazing, yeah.
Wow.
Isn't that, yeah, so we're really excited to kind of get things going, at least I am. Anybody else, but I'm glad that you ventured out, and we'll turn it over to you, Dave.
Okay, well, thank you, Richard. It's always good to be back home. I'm a Comanche Court kid, as I like to introduce myself to people. And so I lived in Sturgis from 1954 till I finished high school, went away to college in Vermilion, nearly died of homesickness, came home and transferred schools to Spearfish, and kind of never came back to Sturgis. And once I found out what Spearfish was all about, and met my wife Carol, who's in the audience today, and yeah, now here it is 50 plus years later, I'm back home, and in this really great room, and having an opportunity to talk about music. When Dodie Lee listened to my previous presentation, and I think it was about the sheriffs of Meade County, she said, "Well, Dave, what's next?" And I thought maybe when I got the sheriff thing done, I'd be done. But Dodie charmed me into doing another program, and I indicated to her, I've always wanted to do something about music. It was a big part of my life when I was growing up here in town, and there's got to be a story. Well, there's a 2-year, 6-semester class of music in Sturgis that could be presented. I've managed to whittle down the first movement to be about music education, and so for those of you that were here for that presentation just a year ago, talked largely about the teachers of music in Sturgis and around Sturgis, and the influence they had on us as music students down through the years. Then that naturally transitioned into doing a thing about performance, because what is music unless you perform it? And so now it's time to talk about the other side of what music is all about. So, the town's first band. I've learned recently it was self-supporting, so no tax money for frivolities like music. And all of the communities in the Black Hills, and I think across the nation, by the mid to late 19th century, had some kind of a town band. If you may not be a big enough city to have an orchestra and big choruses and things like that, but a town band was well within the reach of Dupree and Faith and Sturgis and Spearfish and Rapid City, Lemon, what have you. And these bands stayed in business one way or another, passing the hat, fundraising events and the like, into the early part of the 20th century. The band in Lemon lasted into the 1960s. And that's a whole other story about the band in Lemon, the Clown Band, as it was called. And I don't know if any of you here remember the Clown Band coming to be in parades and things like that. There was maybe a little more drinking and partying than there was band music, but if you were in the band, whoa, it was, you were with your buddies and you were playing, and it was a fun deal until it finally just exhausted itself. So anyway, the Sturgis Town Band, as you can see here in the photograph, and take a look, back row, third from the left, the tallest guy is William Henry Grams, the first Grams of the 4 generations, now 5 generations, to be in Sturgis, and he was a player in the band, as was his son. But then by the time Senator Bill came along, the music stopped in the Grams family, at least from a performing standpoint. And but William Henry he's the man back then, with all of his buddies. And there's some familiar Sturgis names, Beesman, Fruth, Waldman, and other of the town fathers or founders were part of this band. And so, music lives though. Here's Bill Grams again. The family has used the name William a lot in the naming of its generations. Bill and I are high school classmates. And just a little story about Bill that illustrates how music stays with a person. We were pupils of Francis Benson, the band teacher in Sturgis in the 40s. Mr. Benson came to town right after World War II ended and stayed into the early 60s. And so we were his pupils. And Bill continued in music as a church choir singer through all of his adult life. But his horn playing days kind of just faded away. And I got an email from Bill, or maybe it was a phone call, because we correspond frequently, many years ago. He says, Dave, I got euphonium. And he got it free from the Salvation Army through his church out in Kennewick, Washington. He's part of a team of cooks that go to emergencies and forest fires and floods and things like that, and they run a kitchen. And Bill's the lead cook for that. And in addition to being a retired mining engineer, and he was at the Salvation Army doing some coordinating of some kind or other, and talking to the boss of the local Salvation Army organization, and he sees a euphonium in the corner. And just chit-chatting, you know, and, well, I used to play the cornet. And so the Salvation Army says, well, we don't need that horn anymore. It's an old one and it doesn't work very well. Take it. So Bill takes the horn, takes it home. He's reteaching himself how to play and figures out, hey, this is kind of fun and I can still do this. And so that hand-me-down free horn yielded to this concert quality euphonium that he purchased a couple of years ago. And now he plays in the Tri-City Troubadours, which is a brass choir group. They used to be called the Heavy Metal Band. They couldn't get any bookings in senior citizen centers and other places because the seniors didn't want to hear heavy metal, they wanted to hear brass music, and so they renamed themselves. And he's also a player in the Columbia Basin College Concert Band. And you can go on YouTube and you can see little snippets of Bill and the groups that he's part of. And he's got an elegant black suit and bow tie and all of that. Looks a little different from his great-grandfather in those kind of faux military uniforms that they wore back in that day. But nonetheless, Bill was at our house a couple weeks ago, brought his horn, and played for us a little bit. And then he also played at Bob and Linda's church in Whitewood. And you can go on YouTube and you can listen to Bill play. So just an example of how the thread keeps going in music in the community. Obviously, along with threading through individuals, piano recitals have been part of Sturgis since probably day 3 or 4, whenever the first piano rolled into town. It couldn't have been very much longer after that before little kids were learning and giving recitals. And likewise, the high school band has been an important part of the community kind of forever. There's been a high school band of some kind or another since the 19-teens, at least, with different mixtures of people. And then out in the country, and Kelly, you'll recognize the fellow with the little alto sax there, or maybe a soprano saxophone. That's your
That's my grandpa.
That's your grandfather.
Grandpa
Okay,
Dan.
okay, that's Grandpa Dan. And he would have been at Faith then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
As an example of how Faith and other community country schools, 4-H Share the Fun, Peggy Thompson, who I talked about, last time and the like. Music doesn't stop at the city limits. And in some respects, maybe more music comes this way. When you think about families playing together and the like. So, we'll see if this will work here. Yep. That's 1963. Singing a little sharp there somewhere. And that's Chuck Phelan, for those of us in the room who were pupils of his, as the director, and making records of our concerts. That was a big deal. And
TD's in there. TD's in there.
Soloist. I remember those.
well, that touched the nerve here. That's all music and worship, of course, go together here. And it's a whole nother program to talk about music and worship and how those things fit together in this community. Whether it's a hand-me-down, this is all we can afford piano in the smallest congregation in town, to the nicest, most prestigious, best-sounding, not pipe organ, because I don't know that Sturgis has ever had a pipe organ in a church, but certainly high-end electronic organs, and with equally accomplished players, and church choirs, soloists, and the like. I just selected the Messiah as one way to demonstrate how something that powerful handles composition and its popularity around the world, touches people in Sturgis as well, with drawing from people from various congregations in the city to rehearse. And by the 60s, 70s, there was Grunwald Auditorium. There were other performance places in the community that would permit not only a large performing group, but also a big audience. And so that's, it's important, and recognizable names there, certainly. Country music, like I talked about earlier, with the music from the ranch world coming here, has been an equally important and long-lasting thread in music in Sturgis and Meade County and the like. I'm going to bear with me here. I'll just read from my notes a little bit, and I don't know. Turn that on. Maybe it is on. Oh, now it's on. If that'll help any. But this is Coke Chapman, the man with the hat, and his son Dan on the left. And I've also I had a long talk with Dan a couple of weeks ago, and then Jingle Bob Dennis, about a year ago, came to our house, he and his wife Cindy, and we sat down with a map of Meade County, and he pointed out the different dance halls that he knew of as growing up. And his parents were dance hall musicians, as were lots of other families in Sturgis. The Roy, Dorothy, and Harry Dennis had a country dance band. Bud Keffler and his daughter Kay, and I think other members of the Keffler family, had a band. The McPherson family, Coke Chapman, and the list could go on and on and on and on of other players. Coke Chapman is a person I don't think I ever met, but an interesting guy, a ranch-trained aviator. I asked Dan, so where'd your dad learn how to fly? Thinking, oh, he was in the Navy in the Korean War, and he landed on aircraft carriers. And Dan said, no, my son Guy and Philip taught him how to fly. And maybe for out here in this environment, this weather, and this terrain, that's way better than landing on an aircraft carrier if you could fly in Meade County. And Coke did a lot of that. And not only was he just a kind of bush pilot for the ranch operations, but he became a flight instructor, did charter flights, and was a big important player at the Sturgis Airport back in the day, in addition to being a musician. So lots of things to go by. The country bands, when I talked to Bob Dennis and pointed him out, he recollected from his youth what it was like to be, well, he couldn't remember being not an orphan, but an adoptee from Switzerland coming, but the little babies and the like would be kind of put behind the piano and the bassinets and whatever, and the parents danced, and so it was this, and grandparents were there and the like, and so it was all of this and more in the country dance halls. And when Bob was recollecting, and we looked at the map of Meade County, I kind of nudged him a little bit and said, "Now, what else is going on?" Well, Opal, they had the best dance suppers. Their hot dogs were better than anybody else. Now, what would make a hot dog in Opal good, I don't know. But that's the way Bob remembered it. And the guys, I think it was Elm Springs, they were all about fighting in the parking lot. And another dance hall was better for romance, and another one might be better for music, or had the best dance floor, or they each had their own little peculiarities and detractors and attractive parts of what made that kind of country music important to all of us. And then Dan Chapman, as well as Bob Dennis, as our conversation kind of wound down a little bit, they were wistful then about, well, what happened to it? Why did it go away? And I presume there are still some country dances every now and then out in ranch country, but not certainly weekly events like they would have been 20, 30, 40 years or longer ago. And Dan said, well, it became at least occasionally, it was the long hairs and the cowboys. There was tension, social tension between the town kids and the country kids. That diminished some of the appetite for going out to these dances. And then Bob Dennis, I think, rung an even louder bell when he explained, well, roads got better. Automobiles and pickup trucks got more reliable and able to drive and operate in all weather. We have cell phones now. We have, you don't have an excuse. We're going to Rapid City. We're going to Sturgis, but we're really going to Rapid City because that's where the action is or whatever. And that and other social changes helped to put the country dance hall or the Saturday night dance not quite out of business, but certainly it diminished its significance in the sociology and the entertainment value of country life by a good measure. The country bands, of course, then also speaks to the business of garage bands. And I don't have any pictures of garage bands in Sturgis. And when I had a long conversation with Pat Baldwin, it was clear to me that he still enjoys playing in the Short Brothers band. And he said, but remember, this is our bowling night. They're not out looking for business. They're not out looking for employment opportunities or performance opportunities. They get to play together to play for the pure joy of being with each other and the members of the band and simply making music. And I think 13-year-old kids in a garage, and Pat has a special garage where he and the Short Brothers perform, But 13-year-old kids that are in a garage or a basement aren't ready to perform. They may have dreams of that, and certainly some of them achieve that. But they're together. They're with their buddies. You know, is a garage band any different than playing basketball against the garage, or sandlot baseball, or any of the other kind of socializing things that you do when you're growing up? And the garage band is an important part of all of that. In the Short Brothers Band, there are, and if I leave off a name, I apologize, but I remember this from my conversations and notes. Pat Baldwin, Bill Short, Dwayne Short, Bob Short, Dan Short, Ron Waterman, Rocky Riemann, Jack Hornerkamp, and others who kind of drifted in and out of the band, all just getting together for the sheer fun of making music. So, and when one player is absent and they need somebody else to back up on keyboard or vocals or whatever, they take turns, and they, you know, it's like playing sandlot baseball. You know, who's on second? Well, it's your turn, you know, kind of thing. And so that's part of the magic of garage bands. For me, music is very, very important to Sturgis and the greater community, and always has been. From the very earliest military units that were assigned to Fort Meade, up until the very last military, active duty military unit that was assigned to Fort Meade, there have been Army bands as part of the organization out at the fort. And when, for whatever reason, the Army maybe couldn't afford the band, or they were administratively, they were changing the manpower mixture of people and the like, and say, well, we just, no, for this year, the next 3 years, the regiment just won't have a band. Well, the officers and the men would get together, pass the hat, raise enough money, and find players within the organization and say, you know, who's on clarinet? Well, Corporal Smith, you will, you know, all kind of thing. And they would get together and play, so that there would always be music at the fort, whether it's the bugler playing Reveille in the morning, or taps at night, or the Star Spangled Banner, and endless concerts, parades, and things like that. The gentleman you see in the photograph there is, so that I get his name right, when he was here at Fort Meade in 1943, for just 10 months, Angelo La Mariana was the leader. He was the chief warrant officer, he was the bandmaster of the 88th Glider Infantry Regiment Band. After the war, he went on to continue as a music educator and lived to be into his 90s. Much revered professor in Plattsburgh State University, which is upstate New York, and a violin player. If you see other pictures of him, he's a little guy, and with a name like Angelo La Mariana, with an Italian heritage. Many military musicians in the late 19th century, early 20th century were trained in Italy. They were Italian. Their families were from Italy. It's just kind of the way it worked out. I sensed probably in the early 20th century, for an Italian immigrant who was a trained musician, it was the express lane to citizenship as well, and a paycheck, and a purpose in life, and all that. I'm in the Army band. I couldn't be in the Army band in Italy, and I didn't want to come to New York and be a shoemaker or whatever the rest of my family was doing. I'm a musician. I've trained in a conservatory in Italy, and so they would find jobs in the U.S. military as full-time musicians. If I can make this work, I can escape. And bear with me for a moment here. This is Sousa. the march is to talk a little bit about it. Riders for the Flag. The march was written expressly for the 4th Infantry Regiment, which is the longest serving infantry unit at Fort Meade. It was written in, Sousa wrote the march in 1927. And 27 was an important year at Fort Meade and for Sturgis and for the Black Hills region. 27 is when Coolidge came to visit, Mount Rushmore got started, and the entire regiment of the 4th Infantry finally consolidated at Fort Meade. There had been a portion of it at Fort Meade, but the main body of the organization was down in Francis E. Warren in Cheyenne, Wyoming. The Army made a decision, we're going to put the whole outfit together. So they saddled up, including the band, at Francis Warren in Laramie. Rode however many miles it is from Laramie to Fort Meade. They road marched up here. They couldn't fly. Or they didn't take the train or whatever. They rode their horses and brought all their equipment to their new home at Fort Meade. And so that Riders for the Flag march would have been heard at Fort Meade, probably purchased, hey, it's our song, and so the unit is going to play that over and over and over again, as well as here in the community. And I have an old National Guard friend who's a former bandmaster, and I sent a query off to him a couple of weeks ago and asked if the modern day National Guard band that comes out to Fort Meade once a year at least plays Rider for the Flag and Riders for the Flag. He said, oh, of course. It's in military literature today. And Sousa was prolific. He wrote a lot of music, and we still remember him. We still play his music. The other little 1927 tidbit, Coolidge was here. Soldiers from Fort Meade were a big part of his security detail, and they were just the muscle to get the White House to Custer Park and get it functioning properly. Well, we need a driver to go to Rapid City to get another load of ice, or whatever. Well, a soldier from the 4th Infantry would have gotten in the car and gone to Rapid City to get stuff and all of that. Well, the regimental commander, a Colonel Latrobe, was so effective in providing support to the White House that when Coolidge said, hey, I'm not running again, and went back to Washington, D.C., he remembered Latrobe and had Latrobe reassigned from Fort Meade to the White House to be his senior military liaison guy. So he got out of Fort Meade. What did the Latrobe family think about that? Like, oh no, Dad, we want to stay here at Fort Meade, or we get to go to Washington. It might be a mixed bag. So maybe one of the Latrobe kids was in a garage band, and didn't want to give up his spot. So now comes musical celebrities, and Sturgis has had its share and will continue to have musical celebrities. I'm just darn convinced of that. Paul Berget is the earliest or the oldest of the celebrities that I could recollect and find information about. Paul's a couple years younger than me. He was part of the Brady Bunch family out of Fort Meade. That was Dr. Perry and Mrs. Carol Berget. They were both widowed, married, and brought 6 kids together. Lived in one of the big duplexes at Fort Meade. All of them were musical one way or another. Paul, the shining star of the bunch, largely a self-taught ukulele player to begin, and then very quickly that progressed to the guitar. The family had the means to permit lessons with Jack DeCory, who was a very well-known guitar teacher in Rapid City. And the like. And Paul's gone on to spend a whole lifetime in music. Graduated from high school here, the University of Minnesota in 1973, and then he's one of the tiny handful of Sturgis people who performed on Broadway. He was a fresh college graduate, went to New York City, and a Broadway producer needed a boyish-looking adult who could play the lute well, and well enough to be on Broadway, and Paul gets hired for the job and plays Christopher Plummer is the lead in that production of Cyrano. And so, as Paul teases, I started at the top, and I've been working my way down ever since. And so he broke into Broadway early on, went back to Minneapolis, where he'd gone to college, had a music store in the little commercial strip of businesses that's right next to me. It's called Dinkytown. And then has had a long career in musical performance. And let's see, Paul had a long career as he was still in high school, and then moving on. That's not rock and roll. Largely, I think, where Paul still earns a good living as a lute player and instructor in the Minneapolis area. And so you can hear him at a lot of fancy cocktail parties and weddings and other things where they need lute music. Could you do that at Elm Springs in the dance hall? Maybe, you know, who knows? Paul's a talented enough player that I think he could make that happen. Then, next up for celebrities, you have to include the Fellners and the importance that that family has had and continues to have in the Sturgis area. Mike and Carol, the parents, and then their three daughters, Heidi, Jenny, and Emily, all very, very talented. And this is now their son-in-law, Brian Sears, who's a performer as well. And Jenny and Brian both have Broadway credentials. Jenny with some impressive things in Mamma Mia and Wicked and a couple of other shows on Broadway. And Emily also is a performer. These two sisters live in the New York City metro area and continue as in performance through, that's their other sister. There's one other thing I need to do here. Just to give you an idea of what they've been up to recently. And Brian Sears, his Broadway credentials include long runs as one of the co-leads, one of the important players in the Book of Mormon. That's been a mainstay for him for a number of years, along with other productions.
Hi, hello, how are you today? We have come to sing and dance and play, whether it be do, re, mi, 1, 2, 3, or A, B, C. Or low. Really, really fast. Or slow. Staccato or crescendo. Maestro says, here we go. Now look around and wave hello.
That is a TV commercial, if you would, for their Maestro Tales education program that they created. And you can subscribe to it. You just go to the, either you can search the Fellners or Maestro Tales and learn more about how you can buy it. And it's designed for preschoolers to teach them fundamentals of music, rhythm, tone, simple little instruments that little kids can play and things like that. And so an example of how their talents and their capabilities, their ingenuity is stretched from Sturgis, where those of you that grew up with them or taught them or whatever know what their capabilities are, and I can only imagine they're formidable. And so to stretch from here to the Broadway stage and now into the digital world with a training thing like this. When I visited with the two sisters the other day, why they had high praise for their parents and the teachers that they had in Sturgis for making just really an endless stream of opportunities available for them. Whether it's going to Rapid City to the Civic Center to see something, hear something. Their piano teacher in spirit, the woman who was on the faculty at Black Hill State, all of a sudden I can't say her name.
Janine Larson?
Yes, okay. And then of course Dave Martinson here in Sturgis as well. And what all that meant to these young ladies as they were learning. All three of them, because Heidi is a busy performer in films, on stage. She has a stand-up comedy routine, and she does a lot of voice training. And she lives in the Minneapolis area and is a very, very busy entertainment professional of one kind or another. Another guy from essentially the same generation is Christian Boy. I had a nice visit with him the other day as well for some background on what growing up in Sturgis was like for him, and another guy who credits his parents and many teachers and other adults in the community during the time he was growing up here, which would have been the decade of the 80s, just allowing him to do his thing, and how important that was in this community for him personally, and I'm sure for the many, many endless audiences here in Sturgis, whether they were fellow students or the adults that would come to a high school play, or he spoke fondly of the madrigal, the first madrigal that the town did. And he said, I went from my mom's office in the Lutheran church across the street and talked to his father, Daish, I think was the pastor then, at St. Francis, and said, can we use the old sanctuary that had become the parish hall to put on a madrigal? And, well, permission was granted, and ba-boom, ba-boom, and all of a sudden the town is getting to experience a madrigal that the school put together. And so, and for Chris, it reached back. And I don't know much about his family, but his dad was the county highway superintendent, something like that. Was that his dad? He says, yeah, my dad wore a cowboy hat, he was a construction worker, and he built a puppet stage for me. You know, that kind of a dedication from a parent who recognizes the abilities of a youngster. And now I'm the dad, what do I do to make this little boy successful? Well, in second grade, you build him a puppet stage, and step by step by step. Christian's on Broadway as a set designer, and at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. as a set designer, and as a theater professor at a college in Moorhead, Minnesota these days. So another example of growth, development, entertainment, all of that revolves around music in a community like Sturgis. And then, of course, we must acknowledge Roxy's spot here in the community. Even with the interruption of going away to travel the world, where she didn't stop playing and performing, and then coming back home. I got a note from Dennis just yesterday, in fact, and he acknowledged the hundreds of pupils that she has had with piano and voice. 10 years of public school teaching, a pianist at the Presbyterian Church and the Lutheran Church. If you had a show of hands in the Sturgis, Meade County, Greater Black Hills area, how many people would say, yep, at my wedding, or sang at my mom's funeral, or something like that? So the influence of Roxy and her sister Candy and the like, with the support of the community, educated here and up the road in Spearfish. I remember watching Roxy in the lead of the musical Oklahoma on the stage at Black Hill State. And not really knowing her, she's a few years older, so we missed each other in high school and the like, which we knew of Roxy and Candy. And then being a college student and seeing her with the lead, realizing that, oh, this lady, this gal, my contemporary, she can really sing. And she's at home on the stage and the like. And so another just important example of how music has been important here in the community. There are other notable performers, at least for my generation, or their plus or minus. Robert Merritt was a child prodigy trumpet player here in Sturgis, and if I'm remembering my history right, he graduated from high school in 1963. He's a class of 63, and went to school at the University of Oklahoma. Don't know why he chose that, but that's where he went to school as a freshman, so he would have been 18 years old. And auditioned, he was a music major, auditioned for was first chair trumpet. Now, move over, you Okies. I'm new in town, and I'm from Sturgis. And Francis Benson taught me how to play the trumpet. And then he taught himself, I think, beyond that. And his career went on from there. And he's had a long, long career as a music educator. A break in service as a policeman for a number of years. And how in the world that ever happened, I don't know. But went back into music education and also as a performer through endless weddings and festivals and things like that. So Bob Merritt's important. Ken Buchanan, from another generation, is important as someone who was educated here and at Black Hills. Started his adult life as a music performer in this region, and music store manager and then owner in Spearfish. He's 10 years into that, and all of a sudden, I'm going to do something different, and got an age waiver and qualified for a walk-on job in a U.S. Air Force band. And then he spent 20 years on active duty in the Air Force as a euphonium player, and continues to perform. Is married to a military musician, and she is Dr. Buchanan, and she's a bassoon player. And so there's another musical family that has been created. And then from another even older generation, he didn't go to school here, he was born here, and that's Nancy and Chuck Phelan's son, Andrew, who has had a long, long career as a professional musician in the coastal Carolinas area with a big full-up orchestra. And if you go to YouTube and search Andrew Phelan Orchestra, sit down and pour yourself a cool one and listen or dance to Andrew Feet. He inherited all of his dad's talents for playing the drums, and I think his mom's talents for being a show person, and just darn good, when you see that, and realize that, here's a kid that got a little start anyway in Sturgis. He ultimately they moved to Rapid City, and he graduated from high school there. And then others that I could think of, and those of you in the audience could remember and nominate many, many others, people like Roy and Rita Farrell. Mr. Farrell sang at my mom's funeral, things like, and Mrs. Farrell was my teacher in junior high, and like, so important musicians. And the Farrells were all important performers as musicians and music educators. Okay, so for those serious players here in Sturgis who maybe don't make a full-time living out of music, there's certainly been an endless stream of musicians who've made way more than pocket money performing as well. This is Dan Chapman, who's a youngster, and just off the left border of this snapshot is the famous or infamous Single Jim Fredrickson, who's a Rapid City-based musician who left lots of earprints throughout the Black Hills. And Shep the Wonder Dog, who was Jim's theatrical sidekick, and for some of the magic acts that Jim would do. And Dan Chapman, when he was still in high school, got called by the proprietor of the Anchor Bar in Rapid City, who said, "I'm starting a house band, and I hear you're pretty good. I'd like you to play. Can you come on this certain day, bring your guitar," and Dan's a bass guitar player and vocalist, and we'll just see how it works. Well, that lasted for a full year for him, playing with Single Jim and other regional musicians. And when I talked to Dan about that, he said, yeah, the senior year, it was hard to pay attention in high school because he was working Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sundays in the bar and finishing high school. And I said, did you nod off in class a little? Well, occasionally. So just the hazards, I guess, of the life of a musician. But Dan's gone on and to perform in this group, Sister Donna, John Culbertson, John Smith, and then there's this list that goes on and on and on of Don Peck, the Rosellis brothers, who are largely from the Lee Deadwood area, but did a lot of performing here. Lauren Erickson, Dennis Millick, John Aga, Dick Kopp, Dennis Clausen, Kevin Jensen, Mark Salisbury, not necessarily people that I knew personally, but are all important, particularly from the decade of the 70s forward, as bar band players here, making a living. Dan talked a little bit about the importance of the musicians' union for him and his compatriots in the music business. I don't know that the musicians' union is all that active these days, but for Dan in the 1970s, he says, well, you got jobs. And he would occasionally get hired by traveling groups that would come through, and their bass player got sick or fired or too drunk to play or whatever. And they'd call Dan, and he'd have to just show up and play. You had to be good enough to just immediately perform and fit in and get paid. So that was important for these folks. Then, one other thing just about the bar bands and the like, and I don't have a take it to the bank footnote for this, but it's a myth, legend that I heard, that in the early 1960s, when the Titan missile bases were being built, Roger Holofka and another person poured a big slab of concrete somewhere on a pasture out on the Alkali Road and made a one summer long only dance hall out there for the missile base workers. It was called the Cactus Corral. And I don't know I've asked a few people about that, and people either not talking, or maybe it didn't happen. But the little bit that I know about Roger Halafka and his daring devil-do, all tackle any assignment kind of thing, and there likely could have happened. You know? And so, but anyway, so if you hear of the Cactus Corral, let me know. I'll put it in as a solid footnote. And then the Story family is another example of how music is important in Sturgis and for the region, really. Started in the 1967-68. Sadly, the family had the passing of their son Kim in 1968, and according to some things I've read, Francis' stories is that Kim was the real musician in the family, and had come up with the idea of let's start a family band, and we'd call it the Story Band. And it could be the 6-story band, or the 7-story band, or however many players there were in the group. And so that's what, there's a long, long history of the Stories. And they were busy. In the 1970s, they were playing every Saturday night at the Elks Club in Rapid City, at other places around in the region. And Daryl's story is, he and I have communicated recently, and he explained how as the brothers kind of aged out of the band, went off to college or whatever, they would bring in other players to keep the musical group going, and that his dad was largely a self-taught guitar player, and when the Story family came here from Spokane, Washington in the mid-1960s, they were all about water sports. Daryl said his dad, they had a Chris Craft boat, and they came out here to South Dakota. Well, Fort Meade, the water isn't very deep, you know? And so they sold the boat and reinvested that recreation money into musical instruments, and they took off from there. And long, long history of the group playing into 1982, when Daryl finally graduated from the School of Mines and was ready to start his professional career as an engineer. That was the Story Band by then had ceased to exist. But along the way, there were various players that filled in for them. Donna Green, her sister Jeanette, Ann Townsend, Lori Williams, Terry Trask, Holly Hoffman, another young gal named Erin, and Daryl couldn't remember her last name, but he said she was really important in the band. Someone named Jeff Mashburn, and a guy from Rapid City named Craig Burnett were all part of the group, kind of coming and going down through the years. And so that's an important part of music here, and what it means to the community, what it meant for these kids growing up. I know that Ken's Story was the chief engineer at Fort Meade. And then Francis became an educator here. And I've heard from other teachers that Francis' Story was a force in the classroom. That she was effective with students. And she went on as they moved back into the Eastern Washington, continued to teach 42 years in the classroom as either a full-time teacher and then in her senior years as a substitute. So that's a tribute to her capabilities and the influence that she had on young people. Then couldn't resist making a copy of this advertisement. And Kelly, you're smiling there. And we've all been to Philtown, for one event or another, a meal, a drink, socializing, what have you. And the real durable player through all of this is this fine lady. And this is Ellie Hand, a faith gal with her brothers and sisters. trained at St. Martin's. She was in the right age window to be a pupil of the famous Sister Clement, who was arguably, I think, the town's most well-known or upper division teacher of piano for students. You learned at the hands of the other ladies that taught piano here. But then once your talents and your dedication reached a certain level, then you went up the hill and took lessons from Sister Clement. And Allie was one of those people. And she also trained in Chicago for a year at a Catholic music school of one kind or another. In addition to working here at Philtown and elsewhere, and in Rapid City, various supper clubs and places. Many years of playing at Little America down in southeastern Wyoming. Mount Rushmore in the dining room in the old days when that was a classy, it wasn't just a cafeteria. You went to Mount Rushmore kind of for a fancy dinner, and Allie Hand was there providing dinner music for you. I'm forgetting the third place. Mount Rushmore, Little America, Philtown, weddings and funerals, endless church services.
She was on TV.
And that's right, yes, and on KFTA, yeah, she was on television.
She was always on Third Shepherd.
Yeah, on the early days of television and radio here in the Black Hills region. And among the just priceless artifacts that are part of the Allie Hand collection are two of her songbooks. And this is just a random page out of the songbook. And 50 years ago I could read music, but not music like this. And I look at this, I'm just absolutely lost. But to see what that was all like and all about and the like, and
Tom in the wine makes me happy, makes me feel fine.
we've all heard this, and it's authentic, it's live. As Kelly pointed out, you can hear the silverware clattering and a little kind of side talk.
And here's to the silver sea, but most of all a toast for you and me. Tiny bubbles in the wine, makes me happy, makes me feel fine, Tiny bubbles, makes me warm all over, with a baby that I'm gonna love you till the end of time. So here's to the golden moon, and here's to the silver sea, but most of all a toast for you and me. Tiny bubbles in the wine, makes me happy, makes me feel fine, Tiny bubbles, makes me warm all over, with a feeling that I'm gonna love you till the end of time. With a feeling that I'm gonna love you till the end of time.
So that is, that's for Sturgis. That recording of those people is just another priceless. That's way better than Poker Alice's hat. You know, in the Historical Society, we've talked a little bit about we need some things, some physical things, and we've talked about getting Poker Alice's hat out of the museum in Deadwood. Well, they're not giving it up. But I don't think Sturgis should give up these recordings and the recollections of Allie Hand, her nephew Bob Reagan, and Bill Plunkett, who were just mainstays of music in the community for a very, very long time. Finally, this from Darrell Story in an email to me a couple of weeks ago. Music, song, and the artist are the remedy for all that ails us and what propels us ever forward in novel and new ways. A Sturgis kid, school lines graduate engineer, still has in his heart and his ability to express himself this kind of recollection and acknowledgement of the importance of music for all of us. Whether we're just in the audience or we're performers, it really doesn't make any difference. It's part of the human experience, and I think Darrell did as good a job as any of capturing how that has an influence for us. So I thank you for listening. If you have your own stories and songs, get in touch with me through the Historical Society or however you want to. And I'm at david.super@verizon.net. And Carol and I live in Rapid City. But certainly my heart's always here in Sturgis, one way or another. For those of us who grow up here, you just can't take that coat off. It's part of you, wherever you are in the world. So anyway, thank you for coming, and enjoy what remains of our nice sunny day. More winter to come. Thank you.
Did anybody have any questions for David?
Or comments?
Yeah,
Or comments they'd like to throw in, their own personal experience?
Whose band did I leave off, or who did I forget about?
Well, my early childhood dance halls were Camp Creek, east of Newell, south of Dubuque, and Camp Creek and Marine and Vale. Vale later, high school years, but as a child it was Camp Creek and Marine were the dance halls. And we slept on the benches.
No.
I remember country dances were a huge thing for the whole family.
Yeah, for the whole family. And I read a recollection recently of a small community in Montana. The name of the town is Helmville, and it's way in west central Montana, and a ranch town. Way smaller, well, like Union Center today, maybe even it's got a fire department, a church, and a couple of other buildings, about all that's left. But this author was writing about his childhood recollections of the Helmville Dance Hall, and that it apparently was a lot of Irish people that lived there, and it was a good place for drinking and fighting. And I don't mean to ascribe that to folks who are Irish, but anyway, it was an important part of what he was writing about in his story, in that usually the disagreements would be settled and everybody would just go home. But occasionally the combatants just wouldn't give it up. And so one night, whoever the constable was for this dance had enough of keeping these two fellas apart from each other. And he had 2 pair of handcuffs. And he took these guys somehow, probably with the help of others, and he put one on one side of a telephone pole and the other guy on the other side, and he handcuffed them together and just left them there. By morning, some measure of detente had been achieved, and the constable came back, and these guys, and it probably took the fight out of them. Wake up at sunrise, and you're still in Helmville, and your head hurts, and what am I doing here? Or how did I get here? And so anyway, I've digressed, but a different story. So
I was hearing about Chris Boyd.
When in high school, he was a good friend of my daughter's, and they spent time at my house, and I came home from work one night and I had just purchased a Studio Grand piano. And I placed it in my living room on the wall where my upright grand used to be, or next to that wall, thinking that was the best place for it. Well, I came home from work one night and the piano had been moved. This is a Studio Grand piano. I mean, it wasn't any small task. And I said to Carol Ann, who moved the piano? Chris. So that's where his staging came in.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it looked better on the other wall.
And it actually, it was, and it stayed in that place forever and ever after that, until I moved, so. Chris had the right idea, but I went, what? Who moved my piano?
Those things go on and on. So anyway, thank you folks for sharing.
You mentioned the Cactus Corral,
Mm-hmm.
and I texted John Canoyer and said, what can you tell me about the Cactus Corral? So as soon as I get the reply, I'll forward
And
it.
he very well might know.
He's in the neighborhood.
Yeah. And, well, like Johnny Yeager, I think we could do a full program about Roger and his exploits as well. And he and a whole bunch of other characters from the community. Poker Alice can't have all the glory. We have others to share.
That's fine.
So anyway, thank you folks.
Thank you, David, for coming. Here's a little token of our appreciation.
Oh, goodness.
Glad that you could be here, and I think we need to start, what's next?
Yeah.
Jody's not here to say it, but I can say it.
What's next? Carol gets negotiate with her.
If Jody would have been here today, I would have said, don't let those eyes of hers get you in trouble.
Talk about Robert Dennis, he's gonna be here in January. He is gonna be here, and he's gonna share his family history as well as his own history or story about his adoption. And he will also do some cowboy poetry and a couple songs. So, great program coming up in January also, and the title of his program is How Did I Get Here?
Carol has given Bob Dennis the title of World's Best Grandpa. We watch him on Facebook. And Carol grew up on a farm in Wyoming and knows all about agriculture, things like that. And she sees the little videos of the Dennis grandchildren. Bob and Cindy, they've got a horse for every grandchild, and you just see them riding off, and these little kids just having the time of their life and the memories that they're, and then, they go into the ranch house and Grandpa sings, and what a combination of that, horses and singing.
And he makes saddles.
And he makes saddles, yeah.